Welcome back to Alive and Well Community's Daily Dose, your daily dose of support. And today we're talking about a really special topic. We're talking about relationships during this time of social distancing. We know that for some individuals are socially distancing with their children, their families, their partner. And we know that sometimes this can put a strain on our relationships. So today we have a special guest with us. We have Erica, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, who's going to be talking with us about relationships. Now, let me tell you just a little bit more about Erica. In addition to being a private practice therapist specializing in marriage and family, she's also the associate clinical director for the master's program in marriage and family therapy, Virginia Tech. Additionally, Erica is also the co-host of a podcast, which is entitled Therapy is Not a Dirty Word. An excellent podcast if you haven't had the opportunity to. So, Erica, thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about this really important topic of relationship.
Yes, I'm super excited.
Now, we know that for many people, we're used to a certain routine. And this process of socially distancing for our health has really mixed up our routine. And now we may not have our own space, and it may be a trying time. I'm wondering, what are some of the things you're seeing in terms of relationships, whether it's intimate relationships or whether it's even family dynamics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think that obviously there's pressure on families and on couples right now because of just the overall sort of stress of what's happening, right? Like the stress of the pandemic, the stress of navigating your life. Obviously, lots of people have lost jobs or had reduced income. So there's a lot of stress that people are dealing with, a lot of different stressors that people are dealing with. And then also typically sort of increased time together. And so folks are trying to sort of figure out how to navigate that. And so I think that, we can sort of get into how families, I think, can best approach it. But I think families definitely families and couples want to start by this place of understanding that we are in a time of rapid change and giving themselves a little space to adjust and figure that out, not expecting to be able to turn on a dime when everyone's world has sort of been shaken and changed. And so giving yourselves and giving your family members that grace to realize it's going to take us a moment to adjust. We're not going to be able to just adjust, in 1 week necessarily, or even 2 weeks. It's going to take some time.
Now, with that adjustment, what are some of the things we can do to help ease that adjustment and make it more natural, more comfortable, and help everyone out?
Yeah, so I definitely think there are a few things that folks can do. So one that I recommend is trying to figure out a new routine. So it'll take time to develop, but I think especially, I've worked with clients for a long time who work from home, either fully or partially. And it sounds like just basic boring advice, but it is actually really important to develop a routine that works for you. Your routine is not going to look the same as everybody else's. Your routine may not be the same as your partner's in the same household with you. All that matters is that you start to sort of carve out a space that works for you to help you feel as productive as you need to be, as connected to your family as you want to be, and helps you sort of maintain your own sort of mental health and spiritual health and physical health and that sort of thing. So it's boring advice, but it is absolutely true that it is important to think about what's important for you in your routine. And then the other piece is being intentional about spending time together. I think when we're all in the house at the same time, there's just this sort of like, we may think we're spending time together, but everybody's, some people are in the basement and somebody's in the bedroom, and there isn't this real sort of intentional, okay, let's sit down and either have a meal together or maybe play a board game or watch a movie. Anything that you can do in order to carve out some time that is still sort of intentional and thoughtful. And then the last thing, of course, is you got to get away from people at times. So however you need to do that, whether that's going to a separate room in the house, maybe going for an appropriate social distancing walk. I think it's really important that you carve out some time for yourself. And obviously that's different for everybody. If you're more introverted, you're going to need a little bit more time to yourself. If you're more extroverted, you might not need as much. But I would say pretty much everybody needs some alone time. And so be thinking about how to get that and how to have a conversation with your partner about how to get that, and how to talk to your kids about the sort of importance of, okay, mommy's going to go do this other thing right now. You stay here and play on the iPad for a little while, because we all need breaks, and we all need our own space.
Yeah, I think that intentionality is really important, about intentionally spending time together and also intentionally giving yourself that break. And so I love that you mentioned that it's okay for us to say, you know what, I need some time for me. I need some space for me. Is there a way that we can say that so other people can understand it and maybe not take that personally, whether it's our children or a partner, in saying, I love you and I need some space?
I mean, I think you hit the hammer on the nail right there. Is I love you and I need some space. I mean, I think you can talk to, especially to your partner, you can talk to them about sort of what having that space does for you, right? Like if I can talk about like taking the time to read a book to myself, like recharges me, replenishes me, gives me something else to talk about, right? Like if we've been living in the same house for weeks, doing basically the same things, it's nice to do something on my own and have that to kind of bring back into the relationship. And then I think for your children, it's sort of modeling that everybody needs their own space, right? Like you're saying that to them as sort of like encouraging them. What would they like to do with their individual time? What do they like that maybe their sibling doesn't like to do with them, that they can do sort of on their own? So you're also just setting that model for them that taking space and time to yourself is appropriate and healthy to do.
That's great. I have to be honest that I'm seeing a lot of articles out there right now that are talking about relationships, but kind of casting this negative light of saying, oh, after this social distancing and after the wave of the virus, that we're going to see rates in divorce spike.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
So, I mean, it's interesting. I definitely, hear kind of where those articles are coming from in terms of, and let's be clear, it's not just the social distancing piece itself. Obviously, that's putting pressure on families, but the whole sort of factors around the pandemic is also putting stress on families and on relationships. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a spike in the divorce rate to some extent. Even if we weren't social distancing, just the amount of stress and strain that we're putting on relationships, if there are underlying issues that haven't been resolved, that haven't been worked out, those are more likely to come to the surface in a time of strain and in a time of stress. So I think there's truth to it in the sense that I think, any sort of major stressor can cause a person to reevaluate a relationship, can expose underlying faults, and can drive people, can possibly speed up the timeline for separation or divorce. I think on the flip side, though, and maybe I'm just an optimist. I'm learning during this pandemic that apparently I'm an optimist. That I think some people will kind of rekindle parts of their relationship, that there will be more opportunity for some people to spend time together, to reconnect, to enjoy each other again, particularly if you're intentional about it and thoughtful about it. I work with so many couples, especially those with young children, who just don't get time together. They just don't spend a lot of time together. And even if they're, even if they're necessarily in the house, they just don't spend time together. And so I'm hoping that there will be at least some opportunity for families to feel like they can come together and enjoy each other a little bit more. But yeah, that's maybe that's the optimist in me, but I also see that as a potentially sort of good part of this.
So can you share with us some of the tools and techniques you're suggesting for couples to engage and to kind of intentionally reconnect with each other, to rekindle, to fall in love with each other all over again in a new and beautiful. We do have to.
Yeah. So, one thing I encourage couples to do is to think about things that they did when they were first falling in love, when they were first sort of getting together. What were, a lot of times those activities get dropped. And obviously in this time of social distancing, some of those will not be possible to do. But I encourage people to be creative. I mean, even if, maybe you can't go on your favorite trail, but maybe you can find one that's a little bit off the beaten path and kind of go together. Or maybe, whatever you sort of did when you were connecting to your partner, thinking about that and thinking about new ways to bring that to life and to explore that again. I think that that's really key. And then I also think it is a challenge for those with younger kiddos. So maybe taking some time after the kiddos go to bed, even if it's a half hour or an hour, like it doesn't have to be this like 3 or 4 hours of time. Even if it's an hour of an intentional time where we either, turn off the TV and just talk, or we watch something together that we both are excited to watch or interested in. But just sort of taking intentional time, that really keeps relationships alive and connected, much more than people realize. I think people think if it's not like date night and it's 4 hours of us together, then we shouldn't even bother. But that's not true. Just those little sort of infusions of connection can help keep kind of the relationship flame going.
Now, as we're spending all of this time together, sometimes I find it's really easy to just get annoyed by little things, right? And sometimes we don't necessarily process that what we're getting annoyed about is something little. That in the moment, because there may not be that geographic space that we're getting, it just feels really big. What is it that you recommend for individuals to do to help keep perspective during this time, whether it's with our children when they're not putting their toys back, or when someone, leaves the milk out? How is it that we kind of keep perspective over what's something little versus what's something big?
Yeah, so one of the things that I ask clients to do, and really all clients, but particularly in relationships, is when you find yourself feeling annoyed or irritated or angry, to really pause and ask yourself what's going on. A lot of times we get irritated or frustrated with our partner, and sometimes it has something to do with them. Sometimes it has something to do with us. Sometimes because that's the 5th irritating thing that happened today, in the line of fire, essentially. And so I think especially during this time, right, when all of our sort of like societal stress level has been raised, to sort of step back and go, well, how much of this is me really being annoyed by what my partner is doing in this moment? And how much of this is because I'm stressed about everything that's happening and being stuck in the house and, kids are climbing up my leg, right? Like how much of that is playing into what I'm feeling right now? And it's that question won't necessarily have an easy answer, but it's important to ask the question because it allows you to reflect on it, which usually brings your kind of level of irritation down. And if it is a problem between you and your partner, then it gives you the space to kind of understand really what's going on and be able to address it correctly instead of saying like, you just get on my nerves and I hate you. It's much more helpful to say, when you do this thing, I don't feel particularly supported, as opposed to I hate you, go away. So I think that's really key is pausing and reflecting on what's happening inside you internally. And then I think also bringing a measure of, again, compassion for yourself, that you are dealing with something. We are literally dealing with something that is unprecedented. None of us are just going to be able to rapidly adjust to that. And so giving yourself that compassion to say, like, I'm doing the best I can. I want to protect the people around me that I care about, and try to be good to them. And I also want to try to be good to myself.
Yeah, I think that recognition that we may displace that anger and frustration of that we're feeling all of this external overwhelm and that sometimes we may unleash that feeling of overwhelm on the ones we love the most.
Exactly.
So with that being said, I think something that's crucial and something that I think most of us are pretty bad at, including myself, is how do we apologize when we may have displaced that? And how do we model that compassion for ourselves and for others?
Yeah, so that is an excellent question because I'm going to tell you, a lot of apologies are trash. A lot of us are not very good at apologizing, which, nobody necessarily teaches you how to apologize necessarily. So in some ways it's understandable. But yeah, I think the important thing is when you apologize, you are focused on reconciling and healing what's happening with the other person. So you want to take ownership and accountability of your behavior, whatever it was, without making excuses, without getting defensive. You want to own what you did and own how that impacted your partner. And even if you didn't mean to do it, even if it wasn't right, like most of us are not trying to hurt our partners. And most of us care about our partners and our family members very much. But that's not the important part to focus on in the apology. The important part to focus on is I am sorry I screwed that up and I'm sorry I hurt you. And just taking in what that experience was like for the other person without going, well, but I'm really stressed, I'm really on edge, and I just couldn't help myself, and without getting into all of that. And once you do that, there can be space if you allow your partner to sort of talk about how that felt like for them. There can be space for then at some point for you to talk about, I was feeling really overwhelmed and or whatever it was that kind of led you to do the behavior. But you've got to give your partner that space first. Otherwise it doesn't work. And then I think in terms of the compassion piece, I think the mistake people make is thinking about compassion as something that just happens, or thinking about self-compassion as something you just naturally do. And self-compassion doesn't necessarily come naturally to a lot of us. It is a purposeful effort of saying to yourself, I am doing the best that I can, genuinely, being aware of areas where you have made mistakes, where you have screwed up, owning that for yourself, saying, I really acknowledge that I didn't do that the way that I want to do that. I didn't do that in a way that aligns with my values or who I want to be as a person. And here's what I'm doing to try and improve. Here's what I'm doing to try and be better. That is an active interior process, as opposed to just, sort of self-compassion just happening on its own. It takes effort and it takes practice for it to become more sort of normalized for you and just easy and routine for you to do.
Yeah, I think some of those things you mentioned there are things I'm going to have to intentionally work on. I know one of the things I always want to do when I apologize is immediately provide, in my mind, I don't call it justification, I call it providing a context.
Context. I knew that word was coming.
But recognizing in that moment, it's not about providing context, it's about sincerely taking ownership if I want to apologize. So I think that's important for me to even recognize, because we lose sight of just taking ownership and saying sorry and recognizing the power in modeling that to our children. Mm-hmm. I find that when you apologize to a child, like it's huge.
Often don't apologize to children. I mean, they should, but they often don't. Mm-hmm. But it's like, if you want them to learn that skill, then you need to teach them that skill. You need to model that skill for them.
Yeah.
That it's appropriate to apologize when you have wronged your kiddo.
Yeah. Now, what happens if tensions do rise, because everyone's feeling this sense of overwhelm, our children, the caregivers in the house, and maybe we're even caring for other family members.
Absolutely.
If there's a lot of tension, is there a way we can proactively have conversations to diffuse what we can literally cut with a knife in the air? Mm-hmm. How do we proactively have these conversations before the powder cake just erupts?
So, I mean, that's a good question. I think it is tricky because, at this point, so much stress has already happened that I don't think anybody is in the best position to be proactive, just because of how much has already kind of happened. But I do think you can go to your family member and say, and talk about what you're noticing, that you're feeling on edge, or it seems like the other person is feeling on edge. And here's what I'm seeing that feels different. And is there anything that we can do to try to help manage this better? And I think being really honest and transparent about what's happening for you and what's happening and what you see happening for the other person, I think that's super important. And I think there's also a piece of just being willing to have the conversation. So much of what I see is people get nervous and afraid to have the conversation. They're worried that having the conversation is going to make it worse. And I think a more helpful way to look at it is it's already there. It's coming out one way or another. If there's tension, if there's underlying resentment, it's coming out. So if you sort of get ahead of it, then that puts you in the best position to have a productive conversation, to have a healing conversation, as opposed to it's suddenly catching you off guard because you get so frustrated or so angry or so sad, and it just kind of explodes out. There's never any guarantee that a difficult conversation like that is going to go well, but you certainly put yourself in a better position by being thoughtful and intentional about it on the front end and being transparent with your family member or partner about what's happening, as opposed to waiting until it just overtakes you. It just gets too unwieldy.
Yeah, I love that willingness to be vulnerable and engaging.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for individuals who may be socially distancing by themselves, what advice would you give to them if sometimes we're used to having that physical interaction, that physical connection? How is it that we take care of ourselves and maintain those relationships from a distance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really important if you are kind of on your own, you live on your own in this time, to make sure that you are regularly setting up Zoom calls or whatever your platform of choice is, with friends, with family members. And I would say really making that routine instead of just kind of waiting for it to happen, or just sort of waiting for somebody else to reach out to you. Really being intentional. I would set a goal for yourself, depending on how extroverted or introverted you are. But I would set a goal for yourself of connecting to someone, preferably via video, but if that's not an option, then over the phone. Anytime, anything from sort of once to 3 times a week. Again, depending on how extroverted you are, depending on sort of your surrounding circumstances. I also think it's important to get out of the house and take walks. And even if you can't be close to other human beings, you can at least see other human beings around. And all of the research supports how important it is for us to feel connected to other people and to feel physically connected to other people. So I think there's a piece there of being kind with yourself, again, being sort of compassionate with yourself, of that is going to be a stressor for you, that there isn't that physical connection. It doesn't mean you can't endure it. It doesn't mean you can't kind of get through it, but it is a stressor for you. And I think the important thing is not sort of saying, well, oh, I'm tough and I can get through this and I'm strong. Like, well, we've got lots of data that says no matter how tough or strong you are, it is important to your mental health to feel emotionally and physically connected to other human beings. It's just unavoidable in terms of the benefits that it brings for us.
Yeah, and we had a guest the other day say that to remain emotionally connected while being socially distant and distant.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the fact that that message is being reiterated, that we do need connection, and
Mm-hmm.
that connection is important.
Yeah.
So we're coming close to the end of our time, but I was wondering any other advice that you would give to families, um, to partners, even to those who may be living by themselves, in order to really, really nurture the relationships in their life.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, the number one thing I would sort of say is, we've talked about intention, and being purposeful in your interactions with your family members and people you care about. And I want to put I'm going to harp, I guess, a little bit on being creative. I think that we often face a situation like this with anxiety, and anxiety limits our creativity. It limits our sort of thinking outside the box of what's possible. And so I would encourage each person to sort of shift, to try to make the shift in their minds to, how can I see this as an opportunity for connection, as an opportunity to do things differently, to try something I've never tried before, to do something with my family that I wouldn't normally do, and to sort of look at it from a standpoint of, if I say that connection is really important to me, that it is as important to me as filling my gas tank or buying groceries or paying my rent or my mortgage. What do I need to do to maintain connection? If I treat it in the list of things that I have to do, as opposed to something that's just this, like, I'll get to it when I get to it, then how do I change my behaviors? How do I make it a priority? How do I be creative about making sure that connection is maintained?
That that's wonderful advice. So, Erica, thank you so very much for joining us and imparting all that wisdom. And for you tuning in, or for you who may be tuning in a little bit later, your daily challenge today is going to be to find the opportunity to creatively connect with someone today. For taking this opportunity to build that relationship in a different and unique way, investing in yourself as well as investing in others. So, with that being said, Erica, again, once again, thank you so very much for joining us. And for those of you who have tuned in, we'll see you back here tomorrow for another Daily Dose for Daily Dose.
Thanks so much for having me. This was so much fun.